I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm Johnnie Fox. I've been through, this is my second career. So in 2004, I stopped being a owner of a manufacturing company and made the very natural transition to software developer, and kind of went through developer, project manager, CTO. I was vice president of operations at ProMet Source. I've managed enterprise projects. I've managed 50-hour projects. I've managed support projects and whole teams. So across a really wide range of projects. And so to kind of like set the expectation, I'm going to walk through, this will be kind of fun and interactive. So the career path has kind of been developer. You know, developers like, well, I can keep my head down. I'm just kind of working. I'm going to develop this. But I found I needed to have some conversations where these project managers were talking, and I had to say, well, this module doesn't exactly work this way, or I can't, that doesn't work, or hey, I'm having trouble getting this done in this amount of time. You know, how can I have that? So moved up to project manager, and that's a little bit more, you know, working with a team, you're coordinating other people. And I still found, you know, you're having to have these conversations with clients like, hey, where are my requirements? Or like, we need to get on the same page here, or maybe this you know. So I thought, well, you know, after a little while I became CTO, and I thought, well, this is going to be fun. This is engineering, right? I'm just going to work on the technical parts here, and this is going to be good, and this whole difficult conversations thing, I won't have to have as much of that. That was wrong. And then I thought, well, now I'm VP of operations. Wow, life is good now. I am totally away from all this doing everything on the project. What I found is that parts of this job all the way through eventually wound up more like this, is that as VP of operations, I became responsible for everything that went on the team. Projects I wasn't even familiar with. We had clients that work with us. You're the face of the person that needs to be in front of those, and often you're stepping into conversations, projects that you may not even be aware of. When I started with ProMet Source, ProMet had 12 employees. Now I think, Chris, what is it, 50? Somewhere around 50. So lots of things going on. You may not be necessarily involved there. The management works off of an exception principle. So if everything's going well within a team, you don't hear about it if you're a VP of operations. What you get is you get exceptions. Something's out of the timeline, people are having issues. That's going to create the need for a difficult conversation. So what do those conversations look like? Why is this not? Okay, so I've lost a slide here. So what are kind of examples of a need for a difficult conversation? I'm going to make some assumptions. I'm going to assume that everyone here has had to have some of those. And they take a lot of different forms. In this session, I'm not going to try to tell you every time that you need a difficult conversation. I will say, if you have a feeling in your stomach like you need to have one, it is probably past the time that you need to have a difficult conversation. It can be, they can be HR related, they can be with a team member, they can be project related, they can be your timeline has slipped, there can be the client has slipped, but they're really any information that's going to adversely and seriously affect the project or the individual's point of view. So it's an expectations thing as well, and it may be your expectations or it may be the client expectation. So on your side, you may be saying, things are perfect for me, but the client may have a different expectation, and you're seeing that, and these can become really large projects. Anybody here read the Wall Street Journal? Follow like what goes on there? So one of the stories I've been following is this story about Jeff Immelt from GE. So GE, Fortune 500 company, Fortune 100 company, pillar of industry on the Wall Street, 30 Dow Industrials. Jeff was the CEO, took over after Jack Welch, a very famous CEO and leader. And in the culture that's being analyzed right now, one of the issues is having a culture of overconfidence and a disinterest in hearing or delivering bad news. The CEO of this company really didn't want to hear that things weren't going well. And so what does that mean to you? What does that mean to me? You know, what can be the outcomes? And this is the financial outcome and not the people outcome. So, you know, very tangible results to take a company that's a Fortune 100 Dow 30 company, move it all the way from $35 an hour, $35 a share, $32 a share, down to last Friday below $9.
I saw on Google News this morning, some analysts dropped the price target to 6 yesterday, and the stock came down 10%.
Yeah. A failure to have difficult conversations destroys an organization. It's at Delta, it's going to destroy our organization. It's going to destroy yours. Delta Airlines had this. The CEO of Red Hat, if you've read his book, Open Organization, talks about what happens when you fail to have those conversations. Let's see. All right, so these are kind of examples. I'm going to make some assumptions. No, I'm not. That's where we go. So what got me interested in this is at ProMed, as we grew, I was having those conversations. As we grew in project management staff, as we grew in developer staff, we wanted to have a more transparent organization, and we needed to pass on some steps for people to have those conversations. I'm a native Southerner. Southerners are not normally really embracing of having conversations and saying, I have a problem with this, or I have some need for this. And as an organization, we needed to have, I found myself being called into conversations with project managers to have a conversation with a client or to have a conversation with a coworker or a client. And so we found a need to coach and help develop some skills about how do you approach these conversations and have them there, because normally it's a difficult conversation because you feel like something is wrong on your part or something's wrong on the client's part, and you're having to encounter that and experience that and bring that up. And often the reasons we don't have difficult conversations are those are the very conversations that we need to be having. You have a team member, they really need that feedback. You have an event happen on the project. I had a project where the lead developer left. You need to communicate that to the client. You need to communicate it to your boss. You need to be able to say, hey, Brant has left the project and he's the architect here. This is going to impact our timeline. How do we how do we address that? So it turns out that One of the reasons I'm not VP of Operations at ProMed anymore is I'm taking care of a family member that's having a health issue. There is an industry in healthcare that they are in the business of delivering hard news all day, every day. And there's a set of protocols. I have a reference to the back of the project where we borrow that. So these are my rules or my lessons learned for conquering difficult conversations. And they borrow heavily from the Oncology Society, some of their spikes program for delivering bad news. The good thing is most projects, we don't have cancer, or the cancer can be treated. You know, we're not going to die. I think I've had 0 web projects where anyone actually died. So, you know, you would think it's going to happen. So we're going to make some assumptions. So the assumptions are you do actually want things to work out. We're going to assume that both parties, whether it's an employee, whether it's you and the client, that both of you want it to succeed. And this is important for one of the items further on. You believe in transparency. If you're running an organization where you don't believe in having a conversation and just stating things plainly and as they are, this is not going to help you, because this is really, you're working toward common goals, you're sharing the goals of your clients, of your employees, you're working toward a common endpoint. I'm going to assume you know what a difficult, when you know the conversation is needed. And I've had that twice. So the first point is to have a conversation early. The things that get better with time: cheese, stocks, PowerPoint's doing something weird. Wine all gets better. Difficult conversations do not. Difficult conversations are like dead fish. The longer you put off a difficult conversation, the longer your client server is down and you don't call them and tell them your server is down, the worse that conversation gets. The longer you have a team member that's underperforming, you're really stealing from them and yourself by not having a conversation and letting them know that there's an issue there. You know, you have to deliver these conversations earlier. As project managers, when you're having a project and that project starts not going well, if you're going to fail to meet a milestone and the milestone's due on Friday, dear God, do not send that email Friday morning. You know, if you know it 2 weeks before, send the email then. If you know it 3 months before, have a conversation then. You know, the idea is to be proactive, to have the difficult conversation. I've had the experience of having projects where at the sales kickoff, the assumptions are incorrect about the project. Just from an operational point of view, you know, you've got this wonderful project come in, you get the RFP, you look at it, the architect looks at it, and you see a problem right then. Right then is the time to get excited about it, not when you're in the project delivery. Have the conversation at that time. Number 2 is set the stage. Never sneak up from the backside and hit someone with a cold, dead fish of truth. You know, if you're giving an employee review, that should never be the time that you tell an employee their work is poor. They should know that from the very beginning. If you are a project manager, be having that conversation a per ticket basis. Have that conversation daily. Have that conversation weekly. Do not sneak up on someone without forewarning. I also call this foreshadowing, is to be, so all of us have been to the doctor. How many have had like a serious illness? All right. So I've had that, and you have the phone call, right? Hey, Mr. Fox, we've got your test results back. We'd like for you to come in and discuss that with the doctor. That's a nervous thing. I mean, you know that something is up at that point. It's also much better than just getting a text like, found a tumor. You know, don't do that to your customers. Don't do that to the other people that are in your organization. You need to foreshadow that something is going on. At ProMet, the CEO is a pretty energetic kind of guy. And so over time, I learned when I had news, send an email before the meeting of the news that just said, hey, something serious on this project I need to talk to you about. Let's set a time and discuss that. That gives the other person a way to know. It's also helpful within the conversation to say, hey, Chris, I've got something really serious to talk to you about. This may be difficult news for you to hear, but I think it's really important. You need to foreshadow the conversation. Say it's going to be bad news. Don't hit them with the fit.
My wife was diagnosed with breast cancer 2 years ago. They failed miserably at this. The radiologist literally, after the scan, ultrasound, she goes, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's cancer, and she walked out. The radiologist isn't supposed to do that in diagnosis of doctors anyway after the biopsy. It ended up being a thing where we went all the way up to the hospital and said, you know, this person needs something right. She may be a good radiologist, but she's lacking in people skills here.
My wife had something similar where it was the person on the phone saying she just had a mammogram. I'm like, wow, this doesn't look good. And it was just like she was reading and saying that.
Right.
But then didn't say what it was. Oh, maybe you should come in with it. Like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, it's not fair. And it doesn't lead to good outcomes, because what you're trying to work toward is you're trying to work to some good outcome. I'm going to save a little time at the end and talk about some of the ways we work. So, and part of setting the stage is on your preparation. You do need to think about, like, why are we having this conversation? What could be good outcomes from here? So one of the examples is I was in charge of a sysadmin team. This was early Amazon Web Services. Anybody know about AWS ethereal storage instances? So AWS virtual host, you can spin up a computer where you can store things on it. When you turn that off, everything disappears. My sysadmin team turned off a server that had been running for 3 years and had the client's primary product running on it to do an update, because they needed an update and they restarted the machine. So as the CTO, I got to call the company owner and go, hey, guess what? We wiped out all your data. So you have to believe that there's some suitable solution to solve that. And that was actually, in that case, there were some problems with the product. We were able to leverage that. We did have to take some accountability for deleting the server. But soon as that happens, you have to call the client and say, we have a really big issue. But you have to know some of the outcomes that could happen. I think calling early is important. You also have to maybe have a little bit of information before you start calling. You also have to know about the assumptions that you have. So what are your assumptions? What do you think the client's assumption is going to be? What do you think the employee's assumption, whoever you're talking to, kind of understanding where they're coming from. And this is really important for the next step, which is connecting personally. So connecting personally is a little bit different in a corporate organization. What I like to do, what the harness that we had set up at ProMed is for every client is we had the project team, and when the project kicked off, the VP of operations or someone in a higher level would be in on that call, and their specific role was, I don't remember your name. Brandon. So we're in a meeting and we say, okay, hey Brandon, this is your project team. Chris is going to be your project manager. He's, and he would go through the project, and then I maybe would be sitting on the call and say, well, Brandon, I'm here as the VP of operations. I'm your escalation point. If something's not going well, I'm just here. You can reach out, you can call me. If I see something on my side, I'll be the person to reach out and call. And we would have really defined project goals. So one of the techniques is when things were going poorly, conversations like, hey Brandon, I know we've all been getting ready for this release next month. We've got some impediments to that and some blockers. We need to talk to you about what the options are. You got to get onto that common goal. And even if there is misconduct on someone's part, restating that like you're committed to having good outcomes is super important to connect there. Like, hey, Brandon, my CEO, and I know you have people you report to, we're looking at getting this project out. We need to work together because we have this obstacle to overcome. Much better than, hey Brandon, those bunch of losers over at your place don't have the mock-ups over to me and it's shooting the schedule. Like, that is not the way to have the conversation. If you're a technician, you may be having those conversations. You may be having those conversations with your team if you have enough trust there to build that. I'll also say, if it's an important conversation, it's important enough to have in person or to have as a video conference. There's a really great book, a couple books that I borrow from. One is Fierce Conversations, the other one is Radical Candor. Radical Candor, if you've not read that, it's mostly a leadership book. I would recommend it. It has, I don't know why the screen is kind of fuzzy this morning, but you have these 4 quadrants about caring personally and challenge directly. So if you're going to have open conversation, you have to be able to challenge directly. Hey, Brandon, we don't have those mock-ups and we can't meet our deadline. That's really a challenge for us. You got to depersonalize about who's there, talk about, but if you don't show that you care, you're just, you're down here in insincerity, and if you have very low personal caring, this obnoxious aggression quadrant that's on there, that's also what I like to call the asshole quadrant. You're just going to piss people off if you don't care. I don't care what the news is. You come in, you hit somebody with that dead fish. You got to have some standpoint for working together. Chris and I have a project we're working on now. The client's a challenge because sometimes they're an absentee client, and we have to keep repeating, like, we really want to get this launched. Work with us here. We're trying to get to those goals where if you just keep punching them in the face, it's not a good thing. Number 4, communicate precisely. So exact, sharp language is really important. If you say things like, hey Brandon, the server's down. We don't know what's up with that. Probably not going to be a very good outcome. So the exact conversation can be things like, Brandon, the server admin team got a notice this morning at 8:30 that the server's down and completely non-functional. We have a team that is on that and looking into it at this moment, it's still down, and we're looking to find the root cause of that. Like, that's a much better outcome. You know, if someone says, we spotted something really weird on your x-rays, it looks like a huge tumor, I don't know really what that is. That's much different than, we've got your latest MRI scan, Mr. Fox, there's some anomalies in here, the radiology team's looking on this, we're really concerned, and we want to work with you and let you know kind of what your options are here. Being precise communicates that you know what you're doing, and you know how to define it, that you can come up with some kind of item. Number 5 is problem solve together. So remember when I said, like, you got to have those common goals and problem solving? There's a number of examples of items that happen. So often difficult conversations, people will delay having them because they think something terrible is going to happen. I just can't tell my boss that we're going to be this far over budget. I can't tell the client that we're going to be behind. Everyone's really looking at doing that. Not recently, it was last fall, we had a project that was getting ready to launch. It's a rescue project, e-commerce site. So, you know, people are putting dollars in front of everything saying, hey, we've got to be live at the end of May. Project's done. The QA team has signed off on it. The client signed off on it. And all we have to do is deploy it to production. That's all we have to do. Deploying to production, scheduled for 8 hours. 8 hours passes, and the sysadmin team's back and says, yeah, this is not working. We're laying it on the server, and like, we can't get the site to come up. So, you know, normal kind of like background there. So this goes on for, it's like, let the customer know and say, okay, it's another day, and no results. So come to find out, this is a rescue project. The client owned the infrastructure. There was another team that was on the project. That team got fired, and really beautiful infrastructure set up, all this continuous integration and deployment and servers. You would put it on one machine and then it would deploy to the other machines. Anybody seen this kind of beautiful? Well, the other team did not leave the keys to any of the servers. They didn't leave the keys to the infrastructure. There's no documentation about how that was set up. And the call went something like, this beautiful infrastructure that you've got set up is not usable to us. The original developers are not usable to us. And I'm expecting a really difficult call with the client. The client sysadmin team is on there, and I lay out what the challenge is, and they're like, we have no idea. That team was fired. They're not interested in working with us. They're not interested, you know, all the contractual stuff is separated. And I said, well, really our only option here is to set up a new infrastructure. And I'm expecting fireworks, because this was, if anyone's laid out a high availability architecture, this is not a cheap thing to lay out. Their sysadmin team says, awesome, we hate this system. We've been looking for an excuse to get rid of this. You know, could you please lay out something? And so, long story short, we're able to come in. We had to delay the timeline a few days, but we were able to get an interim infrastructure, a long-term infrastructure, come back, document, gather requirements about what we needed. But often You know, you think the response is going to be fireworks. You know, you're talking to an employee, you say like, Chris, you know, we've noticed the last couple weeks that really, you know, your code has blown up our continuous integration. We noticed like you're running over on time limits. It can be that he's going to explode, or you're going to think that, you know, it's going to be unicorns and rainbows, that you're going to just explain the problem. Usually what it winds up is it winds up more like a combination. Is that you may say that to Chris and say, Chris may come back and say, well, you know, I haven't been feeling well. I've got things going on in my personal life. He may say, I haven't been really happy with the project management. You know, there's something else to be going on. You got to come into it with some kind of expectation about, you know, work together on trying to find a solution to what's going on. So you've had all this conversation, you've got some kind of plan, or you've got something at this point, you've got some feedback, you're working together. The sixth step is follow with action. Having a conversation and not having anything after it, anything defined, is almost as bad as not having the conversation. If you're having an employee conversation, if you're having a client conversation, if you're having a conversation with your boss, you know, a timeline for something to happen. You know, have some specific, and those should be precise as well. Anyone familiar with SMART goals? Yeah. So the SMART goals, what is it?
Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic.
Yeah. SMART goals work here. So in the server example, we've got to blow away the server infrastructure. We want this server infrastructure to support X amount of users. We need it in so many days. You know, very specific. And this actually turned out to be a very good, from a finance point of view, like a very profitable thing as well. You know, they wanted to replace the entire infrastructure on the backside. They hated it. So SMART goals really work. So a couple things I will say, those are the 6 steps. On difficult conversations, I really recommend that you embrace difficult conversations, that you should build into your normal interaction, that you call out risk and you talk about what could go wrong in projects, that just as whether you're operations, development, sales, developer, you know, the foreshadowing I find is really one of the most important things of risk that could go wrong on a project. And at the back of these slides I'll have up later, I'll have an example risk register from a project that I did. And I have risks that we put on every project, and one of them is, you know, change in key project staff, and that can be client side, that can be from the agency or from your side. We have changes in requirements. There are some of those things, and if you're just calling those out and tracking those regularly, it makes difficult conversations easier. You know, if you're planning family vacations, right? You go like, hey, we're all going to the Grand Canyon. You know, what do we do if we rains? What do we do if it's cold? Like, those are some things that could happen. Just got through taking a family vacation in a camper with 2 80-year-old people and a toddler. So, you know, like, things will go wrong. You have to set some expectations about what happens if it rains while we're at Disney, what happens if the RV breaks down. Those are things, and if you have those, they don't come as surprises. You know, difficult conversations are inevitable, whatever you're doing. I don't know if you've seen this meme going around the internet. I love this. Is embracing. It's the unstoppable marching time that's slowly guiding us toward an inevitable death, right?
I think I saw that with death metal cats when I was a kid.
Okay. Yeah, so, you know, a failure to, so, recapping, have them early, difficult conversations, set the stage, connect personally, communicate precisely, and problem solve together, follow up with action. You know, it sounds simple, but embracing those steps have helped me, it's helped our team communicate with our clients, and it is something you can train and practice. I would recommend, and I have this at the back of the list, both of these books are more leadership books than they are development books, but they both speak about having direct conversations early and building that into how you communicate regularly. You know, it's not just that we're going to build an organization that are a bunch of people giving negative feedback to everyone. It's that we care about what we want to do, and we care so much that we're going to talk about the bad things. We're going to talk about the things that are problems early. We're going to talk about them often. And by having that, we're going to avoid some difficult conversations. The really worst thing, and I don't know, no one's asked a question yet, but one of the worst things you have is that you get to a project and you have no runway to solve the difficult thing. You put off that conversation with that employee that's unhappy, and instead of taking Chris, who's your developer, and he really wants to become a senior developer or a sysadmin, he gets so unhappy that he goes somewhere else. Or you have the client that's angry because of what they're having, and you don't have that conversation with them, and they go somewhere else, they stop the contract with you. That's the real risk of not having the difficult conversation early. So, questions, anyone? Go ahead.
You said that some of this is taken from the Spikes program at Oncology?
Right there. I like references. I will upload these to the conference site and have those. So the oncology program is a little bit different because they're developing for healthcare. So when you're working with healthcare, it's a little bit more touchy-feely about embracing emotionally with people. Now, my personal style is to connect with people personally. So if you're with me, you're going to know about my daughter, you're going to know about my vacations we take, I'm going to probably know about you a little bit. It makes conversations easier. If you can get past the, you want to take the contract serious that you've got to perform, but it all helps to know that we're just people working together, trying to build something together. If we can get to that and say like, hey, let's solve this. But the Spikes program is really for giving cancer news, and they were not following it when they talked to your wife, right? So it has a lot about connecting emotionally and connecting personally. You had a question. Radical Candor. Radical Candor is awesome. It's available on Audible. Not plugging off, but I drive a lot, so it's very good. She worked at Google, and she also worked at Apple. And there's some really interesting examples with talking to Larry Page and about confronting people that are maybe up and down the change. One of the are you familiar with the HIPPO, highly important person's opinion? Is like when you're in the room and there's a hippo in the room, people will be quiet. and they want feedback, and that is actually that is a organization killer. Just because I'm the boss doesn't mean I'm right. It may mean that I'm the person that has the final decision, but we owe it to each other to communicate what the options are, and if you have feedback, to have that in a meaningful way. I am still Southern. I like to be respectful of people, but there's nothing wrong with saying, we go down this path, I don't think this development's going to work. I had a project for Tennessee Valley Authority and they were setting Drupal on Azure platform as a service, and I had to have a conversation about, our team has no experience with this, your team has no experience with this. I think the project is going to fail before we even get started if you pick this platform. With the Azure rep in the room. You have to have some of those conversations. Go ahead, you had a...
Actually, along the same lines of these awkward conversations, a lot of times the organization power structure doesn't allow you to do that.
Right.
But like for GE, for example, I'm sure like the managers at the lower level they understood, this is what's going to happen. They probably took it twice to raise that upward. So what are some of the things you have seen where organizations can, get around these barriers?
So the question is, where have I seen in organizations that they...
Like I think you mentioned the Untitled Chapter has some references to upward conversations like that.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other books or any other resources you have seen that makes it easier for organizations to see that they're blindsided by their own...
So the Red Hat book by the CEO of Red Hat, I think it's the Open Organization, has a discussion. He was a former CEO at Delta Airlines, I believe, is where he came from. And he said one of the death knells from Delta Airlines was also that there wasn't the baggage handlers, the people at the gates, they knew there were problems and they just were quiet because there was no path for that information to come up the chain, and the company goes broke. Everyone knows it's happening. If you're behind if you have a development team, everyone on the team knows you're not going to make the milestone most of the time. You just have to ask them. Like you have to be bold enough and foster that kind of environment for people to talk. Now it's a little bit brutal sometimes. Like for me as a manager, it was brutal to kind of embrace that and have people say, I'm thinking of Lisa. But we have one developer who's very good at this, but she's like super vocal. Well, this is not going to work.
Sales guy sometimes.
Well, the same thing. Like, so everybody knows about the war between clowns and mimes. So it's kind of the same between operations and sales, right? Like from my side, on operations side, sometimes sales comes and says, we can't sell it if you're going to go force the client to do this. How do we solve? You had a question, or okay. Well, Brandon, you hadn't had.
That's a good question. Have you ever had to deal with a situation where you had a difficult conversation with a customer who just is very unreasonable all the time, just is not respectful? How do you handle that?
I've had to fire some clients. So Radical Candor talks about that one of the points of the book is that hers was employee bound, was that like you give the opportunity for someone to work this way, and if you've tried enough, sometimes you just can't work. Like if you can't come to a reasonable accepting each other's goals and work from that platform, one of your clients right now has a person on the team that he's very, so Southerners are bound by being very polite. Sometimes British people are bound by being very open. This person is but he's reasonable after he's in your face. So some of the kind of questions are, why can't you just load that up in a text editor and replace all the URLs in there? Like, we're just moving the server. Why is the hard-coded URL a problem? But once you explain it, it's okay. But it did take, in that case, the project manager called me in as the operations director to set in on some of those meetings, and I literally repeated the things that the project manager had said and said, well, this is the reason it's a problem. Those references are in the database. But after some time, if you can't get there, and that's the hardest thing. If you can't accept each other's goals, I don't know how to solve it. You have to assume that you're both working toward the same thing. And I have had some conversations with clients, like I had this conversation last week. If you put this requirement on me to get this for the project, we are not going to meet the deadline. And you have to be willing to say those very explicit. At a younger time in life, I would be like, you really want this, we need to get it. With experience, I'm just kind of said, you know, this project has a drop dead date of the December the 7th. The government will not pay me if I don't deliver the code by then. It's November the 5th. If I don't have this by November the 12th, you're not getting this feature and the project will fail. I don't want to report to my boss that the project's going to fail. I doubt that you want to get to this date and have this be the reason for failure either. But you kind of got to man up. And you had a question.
So I've had a couple developers do this, and these are just smaller projects that don't require data stand-ups, and not being super dev savvy myself, I've had a developer at the last minute waited when the estimated timeline came around, that, oh, it's not going to be ready because whatever. How do you define those certain risks that before, you get to that point where the developer is telling you that which you then have to articulate to the client? Is there any way to define something like that? Get that, besides asking the typical big questions, what are blockers, anything like that?
So I will credit this to Chris Smith, which used to be the director of operations at Music City Networks in Nashville, as I used to work with Chris. So you need your project management, typical Gantt charts with milestones, and these are the things we're working on. One of the things Chris did in his weekly meeting is he would ask the developers, reaffirming questions, right? So before a sprint, we're due to deliver this on Friday. Is there anything that's going to prevent this? Is there anything else we need to know? Now, so the first time this happens, right, it's like, well, okay, maybe I didn't ask those questions. The second time it happens, we had a discussion on Monday, and you didn't let me know that this was an issue. This is going to be a problem for us working together if we can't work together and talk about these timelines. So, I don't have a magic bullet there, but I have had to have conversations with developers and say, we are making promises and commitments. You're making commitments to me. I expect you to communicate those and to communicate them early so that we can both have success here. If we can't get to that, this is going to be a problem for us working together. And that's respectful of them, and I think it's respectful of you. Your personal interaction may be different, but I found that successful for me. Yes, sir.
So today I think most of the things are agile. There comes that you don't know enough about our runway, you're figuring things out. Right? That's why we have 2 weeks or 4 week sprints, and then we find out the problems as we go along. But with that comes the challenge that maybe somebody committed a deadline or something late that couldn't be done. But with this discover new things as we keep going. So how do you reconcile those? Sometimes we have a situation where, towards the end of it, we identify some big risks, and we're not going to meet the deadline.
So the question is, in working in an agile environment, how do you deal with the risk of getting to the end of a deadline and not having a critical feature? So again, not a magic bullet. That has to be a conversation of this is the most important thing that we have. So you're wearing a Turner shirt, so I'm assuming you're working with internal clients. Yeah, so that's really a prioritization and project manager question. I think of the project manager being aware of that and really prioritizing, the rock, sand, gravel analogy about you put your big rocks in first. That's kind of that question of get the important things first that you can. But if you get to the timeline, so the issue I see is that you get into a project, when is the earliest date that you know that this feature is at risk and not going to happen? What is your mitigation or contingency? Can you scope it down to the time? Can you move the priority in? But the real prevention point, if we're looking at a timeline, is going to be somewhere over here about not eating up your time. Or you may run into something where you say, we had this feature that's very much required. We didn't know enough about it. Now that we've learned enough about it, we can't build that thing. What can we do that will meet some portion of those requirements? Because if you can't have enough manpower on it, it can't be done in the timeline, then you've got to come up with some solution, or you got to embrace failure. And I'm kind of against embracing failure all that I can. It's hard space. Agile is hard. Agile is really hard. If you don't have good project management, it turns into chaos. It's not we woke up every day and decided something new to do. And that's what it can decay into.
And to me, the hard deadline and everything is more like a waterfall type of assumption that you know what's happening going in. That's how you're able to predict it. But the agile scope principle is just the opposite. You're figuring out things on your way. So
right. So I have a client I've worked with that they have a marketing department. The marketing department commits to, we're going to have this program and this campaign ready, and then it comes down to the website. Can you implement these things? And that's an ongoing conversation about, well, you can't have all of these features, or we can have some of these features. How do we? And if you have to have defined results, you may have to do something waterfall. You may have to say, like, this is the requirements, this is the thing. It's a hard space. Those are the days I wonder why I wanted to project manage. So, all right, I probably need to give time for the next speaker. Thanks, everyone. If you want to talk about this, I'm passionate about it.